Hello and welcome to Fortify. My name is Janine Mason. I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Fieldstone Leadership Network San Diego, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to this presentation that we are hosting in partnership with the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego. Fortify is a webinar series with its purpose to strengthen the leadership, well-being, and sustainability of nonprofit leaders and organizations in San Diego. To help you make the most of your experience, I'd like to go over a little bit of housekeeping today. If you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to email Cynthia. You'll find her address there on the screen, or you can link to her in the chat box and let her know how she can help you. Everyone on the website today is muted. And if you have questions while we go through the presentation today, please put those in the Q&A box at the bottom. And we will hold questions until the end of our webinar today. And then our presenter will be available to answer all of your questions. If you have resources, or if we have resources to share with the community, we will put those in the chat, and those will be available after the conclusion of the webinar today. We will, as is our tradition, have after hours for questions, so please feel free and comfortable to know that we will take care of all of your questions and make sure that anything that you would like to ask, we have time to answer. So we will stay online for about 10 minutes after the webinar concludes to make sure that we can answer all of your questions. We are recording this webinar. It will be available on the Nonprofit Institute's website, as well as the Fieldstone Leadership Network website, along with all of the resources that we talk about today. As I mentioned, our speaker will be available for about 10 minutes after the webinar for additional questions. And at this time, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Laura Dietrich. She's the Associate Director of the Nonprofit Institute, probably known to many, if not all of you that are on our webinar today. And Laura's been a great partner to work with in cultivating and crafting the Fortify webinar series. And so I'm happy to turn everything over to Laura today.
Thank you, Janine, and happy Friday to everyone that's on this call. When we designed this series, we designed it based on what nonprofit leaders told us they needed help with the most. And if you're on this call, hopefully you participated in one or both of our surveys that we're using to inform the broader sector about the needs of nonprofit leaders, those on the front lines, those on the ground. Our latest report came out yesterday and is available on our website and available to all of you. Make sure that registrants for this webinar receive a direct link for that. But what we know is that nonprofit leaders, like all people right now, are struggling and need a little bit of extra fortification, if you will, as we name this series. And so each week at the beginning, we're doing 2 webinars a week. And at the beginning, the first part of the week is more about your organization. And on Fridays, it's more about yourself and how you can invest in yourself. And today we have with us a wonderful presenter who I'm fortunate to have just met by chance and become a great colleague to me, Danelle Scarborough. She has a long history that she can tell you about herself of really promoting inclusivity, developing people, and really with a focus on wellness. She actually teaches in our master's degree program. She teaches developing human capital. So when we thought of this series, I couldn't think of somebody better to lead us in this webinar today. So I'm going to turn it over to Danelle. And I do wish all of you on the ground just a little bit of peace and wellness. It is a 3-day weekend, and hopefully we can all recharge our batteries and hit the ground running again next week and all the important work that you do. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure and honor to be with all of you. Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Laura, for inviting me to participate in Fortify. I couldn't think of a better way to support our nonprofit community during this time. One of the things that has been an issue for us in this nonprofit sector before COVID was burnout and stress. As Laura mentioned, I just finished a spring semester. As we went through the issues that face nonprofit leaders in our organizations, human resources are a significant part of that. And we spent quite a bit of class time on burnout. Not only does the literature talk about the impact of burnout and stress, but the lived experience expressed by participants in the class. So what we know is burnout, stress is an issue for nonprofit leaders and managers before the crisis, before the pandemic, before the world shut down, even more so now. The stress, the anxiety, really calls forth the skills of taking care of ourselves. And so today, focusing on mindfulness and self-care, I hope that it'll bring you some new tools, some thinking about ways to help you transition from this acute phase of the pandemic emergency crisis response. And now we've had a little bit of time and we start to think about resetting and going forward, some of the tools that you can take with you in Life 3.0. I'm going to work with Cynthia today to move the slides forward. So Cynthia, if you wouldn't mind, next slide, thanks. The outcome that I hope that we reach together is for you to be convinced in a way that you say, I choose my response and I choose a healthy response. I watched Dr. Green's presentation on resilience last week and saw that he also began with a Viktor Frankl quote. And the one that I want to begin with today, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. I hope we value that pause and choose our response in a healthy and fulfilling way as a result of the conversation today. Next slide, please. So it's true that that's where we want to be at the end. It's also very helpful to ground ourselves in our current context. What is our current reality? In emergency response, it's called situational analysis. And so I want to kind of brutally face the facts of our current reality. And that includes a worldwide pandemic that creates stress, anxiety for our family, for our organizations and the clients we serve, and for our world. At the same time, that crisis has exponentially grown your leadership challenges. Already you were worried, focused on attending to your programming needs, delivering on your missions. This has asked you to, in addition to that, adapt and be innovative about how you deliver it. Are these still the same services that are needed? Holding space for the anxiety and tension that you know your colleagues, your employees, your clients, your board, holding space and the empathy that goes with leading people through this kind of an emergency crisis situation. And then, of course, making payroll and the leadership challenges. Again, they were heavy on your shoulders before COVID-19, and now they're exacerbated. Burnout, as I mentioned earlier, was a significant issue for our nonprofits. As a human resources issue, thinking about that it was on our plate, and now even more so. And then finally, as we each try to navigate all of that's on our plates right now, staying well, managing with grace and ease, should we all be so lucky. So just thinking about our current reality, I want to take a moment and do a poll and find out, when you think about burnout and stress, pre-COVID, during COVID, kind of what are the big gremlins that sit on your shoulder and drive your burnout quotient. So let me ask you to take a look at these. It's multiple choice. Jump right in and vote, please. And then let's see what people are feeling about what is driving your burnout and your stress. Please select. Appreciate it. I see people are selecting more than one. Probably takes a minute to read them all and then figure out which one is the driver of your burnout, feelings of burnout. Just a couple more and then we'll move to seeing what the vote tallies are. Okay, and I think there we go. Let's publish the poll. Thank you. Let's share results here. And what we see is the driver is super juggler, that I can and I will do it all, followed very closely by really the driver of why we are in the nonprofit sector, and that is the importance of our mission. And both those two combined are quite a cocktail for burnout and stress. Thank you, Cynthia. We can take that off now and move to the next slide. So a few months ago, as we saw, take that off, a few months ago, we were watching CNN, and a gentleman was presenting or answering a question, and a child ran in the room, and there was a worldwide of, oh my gosh, look what just happened. And now we see this similar kind of picture and we say, hi, Catherine, how you doing? We know what the child's name and we just roll right on with our meetings. So there is a level of new world, new dynamics that we're dealing with. Next slide, please. And so we also have to think about, are there silver linings in this moment, this time that we are rethinking how we do business? If you might have seen it in the LA Times on May 16th, one of their questions, what new habits are keepers? What have you started doing when the world came to a screeching halt that has brought you a new perspective and you just have an intention to keep it going? Some of these, you have to chuckle. Zoom morning coffee with my Nana, keeping the shower clean, daily phone chats with my sister, not being so busy that I can't breathe or think. And that's the part where we want to jump on today and to both bring forth the skills that are useful in our nonprofits and that are, again, exacerbated by the pandemic. Next slide, please. So what we're going to focus on today, just two of these things, but I want to show you how they are linked. Mindfulness and self-care are the bookends that we'll focus on. A key piece that you'll see is how mindfulness is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence. And when you think about leadership competencies, you know that emotional intelligence has risen to the fore as we think about ways that we increase our leadership abilities. So mindfulness, emotional intelligence, One of the people that I have followed as she has explored and taught more about mindfulness works out of the Stanford School of Business, and they're focused on compassionate leadership, with mindfulness being one of the core competencies for 21st century leadership. So you see that it is not only a self-care and a tool for our own wellness, but it's a leadership skill, a leadership competency that people are beginning to value and include in courses that develop leadership. Part of that compassionate leadership is also self-compassion, not just empathy for others, but taking care, being thoughtful about ourselves as well. And that's where we'll drive to self-care. So next slide, please. We're going to jump right in with mindfulness. A couple definitions to begin with. I would note that you have at the end a slide that has some resources on it. The kinds of things that I talk about, the people that I mentioned, you'll find links to them at the end. And I would also thank you, Cynthia, for sending out the materials ahead of time. There'll be several questions that we ask, and I would encourage you not just to use the chat, but also to start a journal. This is the beginning of a journey for mindfulness and self-care. So if you get out a paper and journal, or pull up the slides that you have available to you and make some notes alongside, then you begin your intention. You begin your thoughtful choice about taking these tools and using them. So mindfulness, my favorite definition, is the intentional use of attention. The intentional use of attention. Some of the definitions get a little broader. The intentional cultivation of non-judgmental, moment-to-moment awareness. There are a lot of different ways that you can practice mindfulness. Some of them are incorporating more as a way of being, a way of life, a lifelong practice. We're going to focus more concretely on mindfulness being the kind of self-awareness that you can use for your well-being in this moment and as a leader. And so we're going to think of it as a disciplined way of learning to pay attention to the things that arise in ourselves, in others, and I'll come back to that. We're going to think of mindfulness as an intentional way of using our attention. Next slide, please. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to make the case that one of the four, that mindfulness actually supports the four facets of emotional intelligence. But if you look at that top quadrant, where the first awareness is self-awareness, when you think about the consciousness of your emotions, your beliefs, your behaviors, your actions, your awareness of those, so you can make a choice. You can manage yourself. You can manage your reactions to others. Mindfulness is the sweet spot there. It also helps as you are aware of others, as you manage the relationships, but thinking again about the self quadrant of self-awareness, of emotional intelligence, that's where mindfulness really comes to the fore. Next slide, please. So you know that we're going to do some of this together, and this will be our first opportunity. When you think about breathing, it seems so simple, it seems so natural, and it is a powerful way of focusing our attention. We also, when you think about mindfulness, it's kind of a blend of neuroscience, psychology, contemplative practice. The neuroscience talks about the focus, the release of stress that comes through focusing our attention on breathing. So we're going to begin with 4-count breathing. We're going to ask each of us together to breathe in for the count of 4, to hold that breath for a count of 4, breathe out for a count of 4, and hold that out breath for a count of 4. One of the tips, the techniques that I like to use is just touching the tips of your fingers. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. So I will be quiet for a moment and ask each of us to bring our thoughts to our breathing and do 4 breaths with that 4 count. Ready, begin. And I'll bring us back. Thank you for taking that moment. Sometimes that breath of life that sustains us, being intentional about putting your attention there, helps with productivity, helps with mindfulness, helps with our physical health, and just having that reminder is where we begin today. Next slide, please. As I thought about talking about the ways that we practice mindfulness, you know, you Google something and the world pops up for you. And this was one of my favorite lists. And I thought, you know, it is fun to draw upon whether it's Pinterest or Google Images to bring forth lists that really capture the words well. So exercise, of course, taking a deep breath, of course, imagining your happy place, imagining a peaceful place, observing emotions. And that's actually where I wanted to pause for the next moment. One of the things that I would encourage us to do, one of the pieces of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, is the ability to be aware, to name the emotions that we're feeling. And then that pause that we spoke about, that Viktor Frankl identified so eloquently, that pause is, what does that mean to me? What is that saying to me? What do I choose to do with it right now? And so when I ask you for just a moment to check in with yourself, to feel your heart, your core, what sounds are swirling in your head, and become aware of your emotions that you might be feeling right now. And put a label to that. I hadn't had a history of doing that very well. And one of the things that I did a lot was go out in the world, and this time to be at home. My family can attest that I now more often declare, I'm feeling blah, blah, blah. And so I would ask you to, let's do our first experience with the chat box. And I would like to just hear what your response was when you ask yourself to become aware of your emotion. One of the things that I learned last chat box was that at the bottom, there are 2 choices that you have on the webinar. The first is panelists, that all the panelists see the answer. And the second is all panelists and attendees. It is totally your choice about which, when you do all attendees, your name and your answer is broadcast. And excuse me, it is your choice of which options you choose. But let me ask, if you would please, answer the question. When you became aware of your emotions, what rose to the surface for you? Just type it in and let us have a chance to share that with you. Some anxiety and worry, some quiet focus. Thank you. A sense of calm. Love it. Creativity. Cool. Very good. Thank you. We'll keep moving. One of the ways that I think is a most direct reminder of peace and mindfulness is getting out in nature. That is available to us during our stay-at-home quarantine, you know, whether it's looking out the window or sitting on your back porch or taking a walk in nature. I saw some meme that asked, are the birds getting louder, or am I just now noticing them more? So thinking about the ways that you practice mindfulness and what brings you to a space of that calm, sense of calm on the inside. Next slide, please. Thank you. One of the ways that we can remind ourselves to call forth those spaces, to remember to be intentional about our attention, is anchoring. It's a technique that we use to give ourselves a trigger or a stimulus that brings us back to, that reminds us of an emotional state that we want to be in. Each of you have probably had happen when you hear a song on the radio and that was a very meaningful, it imprinted the event, the occasion, the thing you were going through at the time. It's kind of like that. So when we create our own anchors, it's a way that we will trigger ourselves to remember to take that breath or to look around at nature for a moment. And so when I think about the anchors that I've been using recently, next slide, please, Cynthia. One of the ones it doesn't seem like mindfulness and coffee should necessarily go together, but going to the front deck, for me, instead of waking up and immediately reaching for my cell phone and going through the emails and grabbing the coffee and sitting down, taking that moment to take my cup of coffee out to the front deck and to orient myself to the day has been a gift that the stay-at-home has offered me. And so now I think of cup of coffee, I think, where can I go and sit for a moment and be grateful and reflect and look at nature? The next slide shows the next trigger, the next anchor that I have offered, and I highly recommend this for you to take away from you, because we're washing our hands so much these days, building that mindfulness anchor into hand washing. I would encourage you to adopt this, that as you take those 20 seconds, that be the anchor for you to remember to breathe, to look around, to be grateful, to center yourself, to check on your emotions, and to bring yourself back to this present moment. So let me ask you to think about, what would you like your anchors to be? What can you know that are part of your daily patterns that would be helpful triggers for you, anchors, to remind you to move to a space of mindfulness? I would encourage you to write that down on that piece of paper, on that journal page. No need to put it in chat. This is for you. What are your anchors? All right, very good. We're going to make a shift now to self-care, and you'll see how they really do go hand in hand. Self-care kind of takes that attention of your current moments, your awareness of where you are, and asks you to do something healthy with that awareness. So a definition would be you taking an active role in protecting your own health, your well-being, your happiness. That you're making that commitment to own it, to be accountable for it, to take an active role in being intentional about this as well. Lots of research. I intended this to be more of a practice and not a documentation and making the business case. But when I did the research, whether it was looking at our health outcomes, our brain outcomes, our productivity outcomes, that when we neglect ourselves, that we put ourselves in danger of deeper levels of unhappiness and feelings of resentment, and those spiraling into the stress and the burnout, and that self-fulfilling cycle that begins to churn when we neglect this part. Another part of, I think, the MO of nonprofit leaders and managers is that passion of mission that you identified in our poll, that drive to take care of others. And we focus on that solely at our peril. That absolutely leads to us becoming burnout and less beneficial to others when we've let that happen. So we're going to go with the definition and the understanding that self-care is investing the time, the emotional energy, the willpower, the discipline, but specifically the intention. Investing in our own emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. Next slide, please. Another exercise. It's going to feel similar to the emotions, that check-in that we did earlier. This time I'm asking you to think more with a physical lens as you think about a body scan. Sometimes this is called a mindfulness body scan. We're calling it a self-care body scan, and we're thinking physically. So I would ask you to take a deep breath, get comfortable. We're going to start with the feet and move up the body. I'm going to make it a guided one, so if you will begin now, thinking about focusing your attention on your feet. And you're going to ask your body what you might need, what it's going to tell you it needs from you. You can go ahead, you can roll your eyes and you think, oh, good grief, asking my body. Just play with this for a moment. Ask it and see what it says. So as you think about your feet, I would also add one more thing, that you're asking with a tonality of curiosity and care. without the tonality of judgment. And as a mom, I'm reminded when my tonality is got a twinge of judgment in it, or whether it is truly from unconditional caring and curiosity. So you're going to ask your body with that tone of voice, starting with your feet, your legs, your knees, hips, core, heart, shoulders, neck, face, eyes, head. Please take a moment and capture some of what you heard by writing it down. Journaling is very much a practice that goes hand in hand. And so capturing those in writing, thanking your body for speaking up about its needs. Knowing that when you ask, you will probably hear. And so then what? Next slide, please. Another one of those lists. I looked at so many, and this one captured all the things that are, I couldn't have said it better. So I offer you this list. This scanning down, going for a walk, listening to music, hugging that pet, watching a movie, counting things you're grateful for. We know that gratitude puts us in that frame of mind of openness and appreciation. It's a self-care technique as well. Journaling, sitting in the sun, growing a plant, listening to a TED Talk podcast, enjoying a cup of coffee. I've now added that one to my list. Writing a bucket list. What will we do once we are released from our quarantine? When you take a look at these and think of the ones that speak to you, I'm going to ask you to turn to that journal again and capture one or two that you know. One of the things that I said to one daughter the other day, she's always best when she's had time out in nature. So I asked my other daughter, what would you say? How would you answer that prompt? She's always best when she ... And her immediate answer was, when she's dancing. And I thought, oh, that is so true. Put that on my list. And crank up the music around the kitchen and do some dancing. So when you think of self-care activities, would also mention that these also include having a massage and going to acupuncture or having those kinds of services. Those aren't available to us right now, so I didn't pick any of those. But know that putting time on your calendar for those kind of taking care of yourself times, the weekend in Palm Springs with the girlfriends, those count as self-care activities also. Next slide, please. The reason that I brought that up is because I used to think, yes, but that, oh, I would love to go have a massage. I would love to have time for manicure and pedicure. Yes, but the time, the money, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I always had yes buts. And those are powerful, and a lot of times they're true, but a lot of times it's stuff we make up in our head that we're going to have a permission slip for that. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of Dr. Brene Brown. Love the thinking, the research, the storytelling, the encouragement that she's putting in the world these days. And early on, she introduced us to giving ourselves permission slips. So when you think about the first question here, what excuses do I typically give to stop myself from spending time on self-care? You'll know it's the answer to yes, but. Whether it's the time, it's the money, it's the self-indulgence that I could be using that for giving to my kids or my parents or my clients, my board. What are your yes buts? Name them and claim them. Current reality. And then let's use the permission slip. And it's a technique that I would offer that you could use not just now, but in the future. It gives us a very practical way, a familiar way. We probably have filled out a few permission slips in our life. A way of talking about how we feel, asking for what we need. Giving ourselves permission to try something new. They drive setting an explicit intention for what we want to have happen. So if I were to now ask the question, what would you give yourself permission to do related to self-care? Could you capture the answer to that in your journal? Giving yourself a permission slip related to self-care. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Actually, before you move, can I go back one more time? Thank you. Thanks, Cynthia. I appreciate you tracking right along here. I would love if you would be willing to share some of those in chat. What do you give yourself permission to do? The reason that I ask is when you make that kind of public declaration, you're taking that intention to that whole next level. You know, sometimes that's why you do a bucket list or a vision board, or, you know, we have permission slips, is not only the visualization that helps you move in that direction, but stating that intention out loud. And so could you please put a couple of your intention. Oh, I love it. I give myself permission not to doubt myself. You know, if I could put a hand clapping on that one, you would get that. So bravo. I give myself permission to be creative. What else? What other permissions would you give yourself? Declare your intention. Granted, give myself permission to take a nap. Give myself permission to stop working at the end of the day and of the week. Thank you. All right, now let's move next slide. So we come back around to the, we have learned the phrase, does this bring me joy? From Marie Kondo, as she asks us to go through our closets and our stuff to see whether that stays or goes. I want to apply that to our mindfulness, to our self-care activities. When you think about what makes you come alive, what brings you joy, I want to acknowledge and ground it in the individuality of that answer. that the uniqueness of yourself and the answers that you have come to today. And I want to link that into mindfulness. So as you take that time to increase your self-awareness, to be in this moment, to understand what your emotions are happening, to put labels to that, to give time to think about those emotions, the more we know ourselves, the more we're able to respond with care that is uniquely for us. So if you're attending to that emotion and there is anxiety, or there is fear, or there is anger and resentment, those are all legitimate feelings, not to be dismissed because it's not the rosy emotion that you hope to check in and find. The messages are as powerful from some of the challenging emotions as they are from the positive and encouraging and seemingly outward focused kind of emotions. So really wanted to acknowledge that the self-awareness component and the self-care component are integral. And so what makes you come alive? What brings you joy in this process? Next slide. So we've made the case for mindfulness, self-care. I wanted to take a couple minutes at the end to offer some of the resources. I'm gonna put in here an article that I just love. As I mentioned, the neuroscience, the health field, as well as psychology and faith and contemplative practice from Johns Hopkins is an integrative medicine institute that they have, and their publication on practicing wellness while we stay at home tracks everything that we've been talking about today: breathing, moving, getting out in nature. They added eating well, like, oh yeah, okay, and practicing mindfulness. So I would draw your attention to that resource. And the last slide, please. I wanted to walk through some of these. I definitely want to commend to you this first book. I'm going to show you how small, and Ellen Bard was high-powered executive. This doesn't have anything to do with the coronavirus, but her own self-journey of mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, the questions that she asks you to ponder. It's a guided journal. Highly recommend. Dr. Brene Brown, of course, thinking about vulnerability, about daring leadership, being part of vulnerability and awareness of self, and bringing that to our leadership practice. As I mentioned earlier, when you think about mindfulness, some people have expanded that to a much more life-encompassing practice. Dr. John Kabat-Zinn worked for many, many years as a doctor at University of Massachusetts General Hospital, began to focus more on mindfulness as a way of helping people participate in their physical healing, and found so much power in that he's continued his work in now almost, he would be the example of the way of being, the way of life, but grounded first in the healthcare and medical field. For the academics among us, a very thoughtful journal piece, The Mechanics of Mindfulness by Dr. Shapiro out of Santa Clara University. Very well documented article there. One of the ways that I know that this has gone mainstream is when Harvard and Stanford and Columbia are including these kind of mindfulness, maybe not so much self-care, in their academic training for leaders. And Dr. Leah Weiss has pioneered that work and brings her work forward at Stanford. Berkeley has a great website. If you scroll down a little bit, a serious section on positivity and ways that you can not only bring that to life for your family, yourself, but also your workplace, your organizations. And then finally, if you have any follow-up questions or comments or want to engage about this at all, I do not at all claim to be an expert on this field, but would be happy to continue the conversation. So put my email in there also. And that concludes the remarks that I wanted to share with you. And now I'm delighted to turn towards some questions, some discussion, some dialogue, and we'll turn it back to Laura to facilitate that. Thank you.
Well, great. Actually, you're getting Janine instead of Laura.
Okay, good. Hi, Janine.
So wanted to take some time here at the end. Thank you, Danelle. That was really great. Wanted to leave some space in case anybody had any specific questions or anything for Danelle before we wrap up today. We don't have any questions that are waiting, but we'll give you a few moments in case there's something that you've been carrying with you during this time that we can talk about. Again, just to let you know, we will be sharing this recording and all of the resources that we have been talking about. And I know a few of you have added some new ones to the chat function. So we will include those in the resources as well.
I have heard somebody identified that if you're a Kaiser Permanente patient, you can access Calm app for free during this pandemic. They have done quite a service as they do the PSA and have a beautiful piece of nature for 30 seconds as ad on TV. And that's now a trigger for me too, to just sit and be in that space as I see their ad on television. So I commend that to you, especially if it's free right now.
I also understand that Headspace is also free for those who might be unemployed. I'm not sure how they verify that, but I have seen that on our resource page as well.
And that's a guided meditation. Can you say anything more about Headspace?
It is an app that you have, and you can set a timer so that every hour on the hour you get a reminder to do breathing or to walk around, or you can listen to a meditation. So you can use it in a lot of different ways.
Very good.
All right. Well, we do not have any specific questions that are here waiting for us. So with that, I think I'll just, again, Danelle, thank you so much. Especially, I think the timing of going into a 3-day weekend when it feels a little bit funny to be going into a 3-day weekend. It's not how it normally feels on a Friday before a holiday weekend. It's a great opportunity for us to take some time and to practice some of the things and to start maybe doing some of the things that you shared with us, all in an effort to take care of ourselves so that we're better able to continue to do the work that we're doing and to take care of others. So appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your expertise with us and with our nonprofit leaders. And I will thank you all for joining us. Next week, we have 2 more webinars. On Tuesday, we will be having a webinar focused on the legal issues that are facing nonprofits as a result of COVID-19. And then on Friday, we will be doing a webinar on crafting your credentials. So how to prepare your resume and your LinkedIn profile in case you're looking for new opportunities. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Danelle, for your wisdom, and have a wonderful weekend, everyone.